Good evening, bonsoir, guten Abend, good evening. Welcome to our 19th virtual Noir at the Bar. I am not the demented love child of Debbie Harry and Alice Cooper. I am Vic Watson. I'm just looking a bit today. Tonight, we have Anita Frank, Vanda Simon, Joseph Knox, Helen Fields, Lo van Rensburg, Rebecca Fleet, S.A. Moorhead, Bogdan Teodorescu, Alex Hawley and S.J. Watson. Woo! While I'm on, if you haven't joined us before, my woos come from the heart. They are not sarcastic. Sometimes it might sound like they are, and I worry you think I'm taking the mick. I'm not. If you hear anything impressive tonight, give us a woo! While I am shaking my ratty-tatty, no longer ratty or tatty hat, please also give us a drum roll, like as if you were in the real bar. You have the chat facility along here on the bottom somewhere if you want to chat with your fellow audience members and the panelists. We just ask that you behave yourselves when people are reading. It's just rude to chat while people are reading. We also have the Q&A button. So if you have a question for all of our authors, one of them, some of them, drop it in to the Q&A box and I will endeavour to ask it. If you would like to enter the draw to win a free book, please email thenatb20@gmail.com. I'll try and keep popping that in the chat throughout the evening, okay? So, without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Give us a drum roll, someone, please. I still miss the bar for that. Okay, first up, it's Alex Hawley. Now, let me tell you about lovely Alex Hawley. He has been writing Hawley's Reviews since 2016 when he first went to Theakston's Crime Festival. He's interviewed many notable authors, including names like, get ready, Jeffrey Deaver, Ian Rankin, and Val McDermid. Woo! Recently, Alex has gone live, doing a weekly live author chat for UK Crime Book Group every Monday, interviewing authors like Chris Brookmeyer and Ellie Griffiths, and some reprobates from something called VNAT-B, but we'll just smooth that over. Alex has been trying to write for several years now, and I'm sure many of you can sympathise with that. I know I can. He studied criminology and law at university and has a great passion for all things crime-related. Reading for Alex this evening is our very own Rob Parker. So huge round of applause for Alex Hawley and Rob Parker.
Thanks so much, everybody. And thanks to Rob for doing this on his holiday. This is so nerve-wracking for me doing this tonight, considering that I spend all my time reviewing other people. So let's pass over to Rob to read my first short story, Atonement.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. This is called Atonement by Alex Hawley. Of all the reasons to come back to the village, Wyatt hated that it was due to his brother's funeral. It was 10 years since he last was in the village, since his mum and dad had kicked him out in favour of Paul when they found drugs in his room. This angered Wyatt, as it was only normal teenage rebellion and was only an 8-bag, basically enough for 4 joints. In Wyatt's opinion, it should have been a slap on the wrist, but didn't help that his dad was a police officer. So he was shipped out to live with his uncle in the next town, whilst Paul was left there, as if butter wouldn't melt. Wyatt knew Paul had done much worse. The whole village was there as the coffin was lowered into the grave. Wyatt stood on the periphery, far back from the black-clad mourners. Now that Paul was gone, maybe he would be able to mend some bridges. But he would also have to swallow his own pride and bury the hatchet with Paul, despite the fact he was already dead. Maybe by standing at the grave after the funeral. He could do this. People say it's cathartic to talk. No one should die in a car accident. He was thankful Paul was hidden in the casket, so he wouldn't have to see the damage on his body. Everyone was now gone, off to the wake at the Crown, and he was left there by himself. It was cold and dark, being as it was October. The moonlight hit the temporary grave marker, highlighting the dedication left there by their parents, in memory of our loving son, Paul, cruelly taken before his time. I know, that's too soppy, isn't it? Wyatt looked up, hearing this response from the ether. All he could see was a translucent image of the shape of Paul. It was obviously his ghost. Wyatt said, "Have you been there the whole time?" Paul's ghost laughed, saying, "Yeah, I couldn't leave you to deal with Mum and Dad. You know how self-righteous they are. You weren't the only one with drugs in the bedroom all those years ago. I just didn't get caught. It was my addiction to booze that got me in this situation. The reason my car wrapped itself around the tree is because I was blind drunk." Wyatt smirked angrily at his brother's apparition. "I know you'd never have confessed this while you were still alive. It's only now I can't get at you that you have the balls to admit that. Why do you think I'm here, Wyatt? I wanted to make things right before I finally departed this world. Let's see if I get to heaven, because I hear hell sucks and is maybe a little warm. I know that me confessing to you won't make it any easier for you, but I can't turn the clock back to when we were kids. I know you had the rougher time of it, but you were always my big brother, and I'm so proud of what you've achieved in your life now. You managed to get away from the bad influences. That took guts. Now look at you, all suited and booted in your police uniform. I had all the advantages growing up, but I still managed to throw it all away." Paul smiled sadly at him. The last words he said was, "Take care, bro." And with that, he faded away, leaving Wyatt with a single tear rolling down his face and nothing but the grave for company. The second reading is a poem called "I Promise to Pay the Bearer on Demand." I would never have believed that today would happen to me. I'm a user of social media for day-to-day contact with the rest of the world. Today, a stranger contacted me through Facebook, hoping for a friend request. When I inquired as to who she was, she replied that she was a member of a group that I use on Facebook. I promise that this story will not turn into your average chick flick or gory horror fest, but as I write down, letter by letter, I'm not sure what her next message will be. I promise to keep you informed of all the twists and turns. I promise to pay heed to all the warnings that all my friends have given me about this girl. I know that she's attractive and I should not be swayed by beauty, but generally I spend my day-to-day life in front of the computer and do not get too much female attention. So despite all your warnings, I'm determined to carry on, no matter what the cost. I promise to pay the person in question complete respect, despite my misgivings about what I'm currently undertaking. She has now sent me 3 weeks daily love messages, and I'm now waiting for some Nigerian relative to come out of the woodwork. Some relative has just died and looking to give me some money or a similar message to this. I've now been on several dating sites, and I've heard this story happen to many people. I feel somewhat vulnerable at the other end of a screen. I promise to pay the bearer is something I've recently spotted on the bottom of a banknote after passing so many banknotes over to Sarah after our relationship finally went into the real world. There is a possibility that this may still be some kind of con, but at this point I do not care and will probably do whatever she says. I feel a bit like the submissive in 50 Shades of Grey. She's got me bent to her will. I promise to pay the bearer on hearing any advice, either positive or negative, my feelings about Sarah. I feel that she will probably tattoo this on me as evidence that I will bend to her demands completely and will become wholly submissive despite how dangerous it is now getting. And the bruises all over my torso are evidence of this. I promise to pay the bearer on demand is now tattooed on me as I had predicted. She now whips me whenever we meet. It makes 50 Shades look mild. I'm scared what she will do to me, but I have to keep writing this down to ensure my sanity, whatever the cost to my safety. I know that if she discovers this thread, she may well go over the edge and take it that final step too far, and I may well meet my maker. But at this point, I'm so used to the punishment and the bending to her will that I can no longer resist the possibility of my death. The idea of a safe word never came into Sarah's head, as it has got more and more dangerous. I've researched this, but I feel now it is too late, and this may well be my final message. I believe that is her at the door, and I must respond. Thanks for all your support, everybody, and I will now say goodbye. Thank you. It was an honour reading for Alex, and I was absolutely delighted to be asked. So have a great evening, everybody. Thank you, Alex. Back to you, Vic.
Thank you for that, Rob, but thank you most of all, Alex. It was brilliant to host you this evening. And lovely t-shirts, Rob and Alex. So well played. Thank you for that. Okay. on with the show. What a way to start. Who's going to be next? Are you drumming? Are you drumming out there? It is Bogdan Teodorescu. Allow me to tell you about Bogdan. He initially trained as an engineer, but his passion for words led him to a career change. As a journalist and comms expert, he became a sought-after political analyst and election campaign manager. Woo! In the 90s, he was briefly acting head of the Public Information Department, which gave him ample material for the political thrillers he would later write. He is currently Professor of Political Marketing and Communications at the National School of Political and Administrative Studies in Bucharest, woo! As well as president of an agency specialising in political analysis and opinion polls. Bogdan has written 3 novels, all of them bestsellers in Romania, as well as a travel journal, academic publications, and a prize-winning volume of poetry. Tonight is obviously our poetry evening, and I didn't know it. Sparda, also known as Sword in English, was translated into French in 2016 to excellent reviews. Le Figaro called it a noir novel with troubling political implications, as dark and as shocking as they come, while Metro described it as the perfect example of what a good novel, noir or otherwise, should be: intelligent, entertaining, and asking tough questions. So everybody, Bogdan Teodorescu.
Hello, thank you for inviting me here. And I shall try to read some of a short chapter from Spada, from The Sword, which was translated from Romania by Marina Sofia. But in the beginning, I want to tell you one thing. Spada is a noir novel, but essentially it's a political novel based in what we can call police investigation, but I insist about the political dimension of it. And now I shall read. Less than an hour to go before the close of the evening edition, but the hallways were already quiet. Most people were on holiday. There were barely any real news anyway that month. Victor answered his mobile half-heartedly, another smartass who learned how to hide his number when calling. Hello, Victor. Hello, detective. How's life? There's a guy stabbed at the back of Bucurobor Market. Who is it? A gypsy. Don't know anything more, but if you send someone SAP, you'll find them there still. A revenge killing or something? I told you. I don't know yet. Keep in touch. An hour later, the team got back with a few pictures, predominantly of a puddle of blood and fragment of a story. The victim, nicknamed the Fly, was approximately 25 years old. He'd been working the Obor area for the past 5 or 6 months with 3-card Monte or shell games. He was part of Boy Schlitz gang, and that was about all they had about him. A local copper told them that he might have owed some money to some guys. He had a large amount of cash on him, so he had been robbed. He'd been killed with a knife thrust into his neck, a single blow. Victor managed to change the front page at the last minute, squeeze it in a photo and 5 brief lines about the crime in Obor. It was by far the most exciting story of the day. The next day, he spoke to an eyewitness who told him, off the record of course, that an old woman who'd lost her money playing the Flies game had cursed him, screaming that he would get it in the neck. He also discovered that the Fly owed a large amount of money to an Armenian gang boss called Avakian, notorious for trafficking pretty girls. So Victor managed to get another front page of it, bringing into the old woman curse a large picture of the crime scene with the pool of blood, the body covered with a black cloth, and with hints that there were some debt, so moneylender might have had reason to wish the Fly dead. He sent it all to print and sought out Avakian, whom he met later that night at the Volks bar opposite the government building. Avakian would not admit whether the fly owed him any money or not, but suggested he dropped his aspect of the story of the papers. His method of recovering money rather depended on the depth of staying alive. You might scare him a little, send 4 solid Moldovans to pack a coffin in front of his house, or even cut off a finger with a pair of scissors. But why not kill him? At the end of their chat, Avakian paid for the drinks and handed Victor an envelope full of money. $5,000 to forget the name of the moneylender, or indeed a whole hypothesis of a debt killing. On the way home, Victor realized that none of the other papers had mentioned the killing in Obor, which explains the large sum of money Avakian had thrown his way. He toyed with the idea of ordering himself an escort, but couldn't be bothered. He also think about, don't forget paying the detective. Another phone call. Victor is getting serious. We've got another one. Another gypsy playing his shell game, stabbed in the neck. Where? Southern Market. Another of Schlitz boys, apparently not. Watch out, the TV station are turning up soon. You'd better hurry if you want to be the first. The first thing Victor did the following day was to check whether the second nicknamed the Bulgarian, owed any money to Avakian. Unlikely, because he was rich, very rich indeed. He plied his trade because he loved it, not for the money. The Bulgarian drove around in a Mercedes, smuggled alcohol, knew the right people in government, had paid off the police right up to the highest levels. So he had a really comfortable lifestyle. He usually had a band of people running the street games, but even now and then he liked to go out in the marketplace himself to show them how it's done. The last demonstration had cost him dearly. Victor wrote it up as a separate incident with a bit of background of the Bulgarian and well-connected figure in the criminal underworld. To his dismay, the next day another paper produced the screaming headline, "The Gypsy Killers." Bit rich to talk about the serial killer after just 2 cases. But by the end of the week, however, they had a third. Another gypsy, another guy with criminal connections, small fry, working with girls brought over from Moldavia and the Ukraine. He'd been found on the ring road of the outskirts of Bucharest with his throat cut, probably cut out when he was collecting his views from the girls carrying out their business. Thank you very much for your time and for your patience.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Bogdan. Okay, before I go on, I forgot to remind you at the beginning, you can vote for Quote of the Week by dropping nominations in the chat box with the just Quote of the Week and then what you think should be. And also don't forget, you can ask questions through the Q&A button. We are on to our final reader of the first part of this evening. So who will it be? It's going to be Lo van Rensburg. Lo van Rensburg is a French writer and she lives in Essex with her rescue cat, Phoebe Buffet. Her debut novel, The Downfall, will be published in early 2022. So massive exclusive here at V-Nut-B. You heard her here first. She will be published by Michael Joseph in the UK and Commonwealth and the US, Canada by Grand Central Publishing. Ooh. It will also be published in 12 other territories. Ooh. The Downfall was shortlisted for the 2019 First Novel Prize, 2019 Novel London Competition and 2019 Flash 500 novel opening. Woo! Her current work in progress, Eden Lost, was longlisted for 2019's Exeter Novel Prize and the 2020 Lucy Cavendish Fiction Prize. I'm all out of woos. Wow! So everyone, huge round of applause for Lo van Rensburg.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Vic, for the introduction. So as mentioned, I'm going to read from my debut novel that will be out in 2022 called The Downfall. And it tells the story of Ellie, who is a young, inexperienced NYU student who is preparing for a romantic weekend with a much older boyfriend, Stephen, who is a privileged, handsome teacher on exclusive Manhattan prep. Excited to get to know one another away from prying eyes, they basically escape to a remote cabin in Chesapeake Bay. But when a snowstorm strands them, it becomes apparent that both have dark secrets and that only one of them will escape the weekend alive. So the reading I'm going to do is from the beginning of the book, just after Ellie and Stephen have driven down and arrived late at night at the cabin where they'll be staying for 3 days. And the extract is from Ellie's perspective. Leaving Stephen behind, I make my way towards the stairs. Stopping halfway, I face the banister, hands resting on the dark mahogany. I lean forward, the wood pressing against my ribs. The drop tightens my stomach. 13 feet below, the checkered floor of the foyer only exists in shades of greys. I tiptoe, edging forward, playing with gravity. Deep breath fills me with the stillness of the night. I love you, I'm doing this for you. The heaviness of the words settles inside me, and the heel of my feet reconnect with the carpet, the faint creak from a floorboard hidden beneath. For a moment, I found an echo of myself within that sliver of noise. I've stopped feeling like me for a while now, but not for much longer, I hope. Downstairs, it takes several attempts until I locate the cupboards that hold the glasses. Water gurgles as the glass fills up. Once finished, I linger, taking in the silence, the intimidating darkness. The window is a black square cut into a shadowed wall. The quietness outside is unhinging, and I pull the glass of water tighter against my chest. Manhattan is always full of noises, light from cars or other apartments, surrounded by people across the street or the floor above or below. Who knows how many miles away the nearest person is? Out here, people are fading memory. Like those disaster movies when someone survived the apocalypse on an isolated farm and has no idea if the rest of civilization is still around. The same feeling of isolation which had dominated my freshman years at NYU. The worst kind, because it was lived surrounded by the throng of people, reminding me of the one person who wasn't there. A silent shadow shifts by the tree line, its noise blocked by the double glazing, insulating us from the outside world. Do they have bears in Maryland? Okay, maybe not bears. Wolves? The shape moves again. I take a step towards the window, drawn to the potential danger outside, needing to put a name to it. I stare at the shadow until the rest of the world melts away and we are the only two things left. A sudden weight crashing on my shoulder sends an electric fear down my spine and snatches a scream out of me. It's only me. God, Stephen, you scared the crap out of me. In response, he just laughed at my skittish behavior. I thought I saw something. Turning back towards the window, all that is left outside is the wind playing with the snow. Probably just a raccoon looking for food, he replies, weaving his arms around my waist. Come to bed. Upstairs, I pick up my book from the nightstand and settle under the duvet. But before I can find the correct page, Stephen grabs it and tosses it across the floor with one debonair move. Sorry, Dostoevsky, your presence is not required tonight. That's shameful coming from a literature teacher. He kisses me, slow at first, but the longer his lips stay on mine, the hungrier his mouth becomes, straying onto my cheeks and neck. His hand finds mine under the sheets and guides it down, like the first time we slept together. That night too, he guided me too, showed me his rhythm, how he liked it. I paid attention, eager to please. The body under his clothes had surprised me, not the body of a teacher. No flesh softened by hours of sitting at a desk grading papers. I stroked torn slab of muscles, hard and smooth like rocks polished by the sea. I understood the appeal. His mouth and his mind are lost somewhere in the curves of my neck, his hot breath blowing in my ears, while his fingers easily free the buttons of my pajamas, confident I want this as much as he does. For a moment, as I listen to the night, my mind is distracted. On the other side of the closed curtains, the wind howls and rasps against the window like an invisible madman demanding to be let in, seeking shelter from the world being ripped apart, unaware that outside is the safe place to be. I think how the thick glass keeps it at bay, how it also keeps things in here from getting out. Once the last button pops, he pushes the fabric over the slope of my shoulders. My arms freed, I throw them around him before we disappear into each other. A noise wakes me up. Lifting my head off the pillow, I listen to the silence for a sign if it came from out there or inside my dream. As my eyes adapt to the night, doors cut out from the darkness, the one to the ensuite, the walk-in closet, the one leading to the hallway, all surrounding me, all possibilities to conceal something or someone, the origin of the noise. A faint creak and my imagination is fully awake, filling my head with words from The Haunting of Hill House, images from The Shining, terrified that if I look up, there will be someone with dislocated limbs crawling on the ceiling. Next to me, Stephen breathes softly from a place of deep sleep. One arm slung over my body, his embrace of no comfort to me. I want him to wake up without me having to prompt him, so he can sigh at my irrational fears before pulling me close and bury a kiss and get back to sleep in my hair. Instead, I collapse back into my pillow under the weight of my own childishness. This house isn't old enough to be haunted. It's not some decrepit manor of weathered stone and peeling wallpaper with a long history of tragic death. It's an architect house made of glass and steel. Although houses could be like people, haunted at any age. Buried deep under the covers, I shut my eyes and will myself back to sleep. Maybe houses are not haunted regardless of how old they are. Maybe we just bring our own ghosts and sometimes we leave them behind after we're gone. There is another faint creak coming from the void on the other side of my closed lids. The house telling me I might be mistaken, warning me that this was the wrong place to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Laura. It's been a pleasure hosting you. Okay, so music at the beginning of the evening was from Ben Folds. As always, we have our resident Jason Isaacs during the break. So we've got 5 minutes and then we'll be back with more noir. Thank you.
Just a beautiful lyric. Night and day, you are the one. Only you beneath the moon or under the sun. Whether near to me or far, no matter, darling, where you are, I think of you day and night, night and day. Why is it so that this longing for you follows wherever I go? In a roaring traffic's boom, in the silence of my lonely room, I think of you day and night, night and day. Under the hide of me, there's no such a hungry yearning burning inside of me, and its torment won't be through till I spend my life making love to you day and night, night and day. the sun, whether near to me or far. No matter, darling, where you are, I think of you day and night, night and day. Why is it so that this longing for you follows wherever I go? In the roaring traffic's boom, in the silence of my lonely room, I think of you day and night, night and day. Under the hide of me, there's no such a hungry yearning burning inside of me, and its torment won't be through till I spend my life making love to you day and night. Night and day. Fantastic arrangement, that beautiful song, lovely song. You see what I'm saying? You hear what I'm talking about, the lyrics? Now what have we got these days? Well, I'll just tell you what.
I mean, we could just stay and listen to Jason if you wanted, you know. I wouldn't be offended. I know he's great. So, let's get on. We've got 4 readers coming up during this part of the show. Who do I think I am? On deck. Anyway, give me a drum roll, please. Anita Frank is up next. Anita grew up in a haunted farmhouse. Ooh, different kind of woo. With a tragic past, and this provided the inspiration for her spooky debut novel. Set during the First World War, The Lost Ones is a ghost story with a dark mystery at its heart. Everybody, please, huge round of applause for Anita Frank.
Thanks, Vic. Hi, everyone at home. I hope you're keeping well. The Lost One centres on a young woman called Stella Marcham, who is struggling to come to terms with the death of her fiancé. And with her parents growing impatient with her grief, she welcomes the opportunity to go and stay with her sympathetic sister, Madeline, at her husband's family estate, Grayswick. But she arrives to find Madeline ridiculed by the other occupants of the house for her conviction that there is something very strange occurring within its walls. Just to put the slightly abridged extract that I'm about to read you in a bit of context, Madeline has finally confided in Stella that she hears a child crying at night. And that sound comes from a disused nursery, which is accessed by a staircase at the end of their bedroom corridor. And next to the nursery is the entrance to the servants' quarters, where Stella's rather odd maid, Annie Burrows, has been sleeping. Here, Stella has just woken from a nightmare, and as she gathers herself in the darkness, she hears, just as Madeline has described, a child crying. I lay rigid in my bed, barely able to even breathe, captivated by the sobs that softly filtered into my room, though I lacked the courage to contemplate from where. I longed to pull the covers over my head and hunker down into my mattress, to cower from the ghastly unknown. But somewhere amongst the fear-induced fuddle of my brain was a petulant voice demanding I get up. It played its trump card. I owed Madeline. There had to be a rational explanation, I told myself firmly as I pushed back the covers. I sat, shivering in the darkness, waiting for the plaintive sound to pierce the air. When it finally came, I almost persuaded myself it was nothing more than the wind sighing through a loose sash. But then it came again, and I knew it was not. My legs were quivering as I got up, my joints liquid now rather than cartilage, muscle and bone. I groped towards the door, drawn to the sliver of light running along its bottom, a beacon in the darkness. It was the final barrier to whatever awaited me beyond my room. I had long since turned my back on God, but now in my hour of need, familiar sacred words found their way to my lips as I turned the handle and inched the door ajar. The warm light from the wall sconces spilled comfortingly into my room. The crying was clearer now. This was no breeze through an ill-fitting window. It was unmistakable, and the sheer visceral quality of it took my breath away. I was startled by the click of Madeline's door lock. A moment later, her pale face appeared. "You hear it," she whispered. I couldn't speak. I simply nodded. She leant against the door frame. "Oh, thank God." She observed my terror with pity. "It comes from the nursery." I nodded again. I had not attempted to look up the corridor. A basic instinct had advised me against it, but I knew I must. The wall lights stopped just short of the nursery staircase, their soothing golden glow failing to reach its treads. Instead, the dark mahogany steps wallowed in a milky pool of moonlight, cast through the window at the end. Another plaintive sob split the silence. I fought the desire to flee. Instead, I thought of Madeline and the unwavering loyalty she had shown me when Gerald died. She had defended me when I was incapable of protecting myself. The roles were reversed now. She needed my protection, my courage, and she would have it. "I'm going up." "Oh, Stella, no." Her fingers caught at the floating fabric of my nightdress in a half-hearted attempt to stop me, but I easily pulled free of her fragile grip as I made my wary advance. Breathing hard, I grabbed the banister and mounted the first step. The polished wood was cold and unwelcoming beneath my bare feet. Moving upwards took concentrated effort, like wading through water. Somehow, I managed another step, and then another, each creaking in protest as they took my weight, vexed by my presence. I came abreast of Lucian's portrait, wreathed in shadows. The whites of his eyes glinted through the darkness. I was petrified as I took my final step onto the gloomy landing. The doors closed against me. There were audible gasps and splutters in the sobbing now, and it was utterly inconceivable to me that I might not find a living soul within the nursery. So vivid, so vulnerable were the sounds emanating from that room. The air was stagnant and achingly cold. I stared at the door, daunted by the prospect of my next move. Another sob seeped out, ebbing and flowing. I had never heard such a wretched sound. Something at the servants' entrance played in my peripheral vision. A jagged breath snagged in my throat. Behind the obscured glass, a blurred face appeared in a golden orb. The door handle dipped down. Annie Burrows emerged from the pitch of the servants' corridor, dressed only in her cotton nightgown, holding aloft a candle in a brass holder. "Annie!" My shoulders sagged with relief. "Did you hear anything?" "Crying." But now only silence filled the frigid air. We waited, time dragging, while the icy boards bit hungrily into the naked soles of our feet. The flickering light cast by Annie's candle played upon her cheek, illuminating a strange intensity in her expression. My heart kicked stronger against my ribs. Her company provided paltry comfort. Just as I decided to call a halt to this unsettling vigil, it came again. A faint sob, the death throes of hysteria. I knew what needed to be done, but I cowered from the task. Without consultation, and showing none of my fear, Annie stepped forward and turned the handle. The nursery door swung wide. The room was empty. A shaft of moonlight was the only intruder, beaming in through the mullioned window. Collecting what fragments of courage I had left, I stepped onto the threshold. An Arctic breeze leaked from the room, swirling around my bare ankles, sending shivers up my legs. "There's no one here," I murmured, mystified. The maid said nothing. Her candle flame guttered. How can that be? I backed away, confused and perturbed. Annie drew the door to behind her. I heard my name drift up the staircase, and gathering myself, I hurried to the top step, resting my hand on the banister. Madeline had bravely progressed as far as the newel post below. What's happening? It's empty. The nursery, there's no one there, I whispered back. At precisely that moment, I felt an inexplicable shifting of pressure in the atmosphere. Annie cried, "Don't!" And the next thing I knew, I was plunging forwards. Madeline screeched my name. My fingers anchored me to the banister and I crashed into the railing. "Stella, my God, are you all right?" I was stunned and winded, but thankfully still in one piece. Annie's face loomed at the top of the staircase. "Why did you say that?" I gasped. "Why did you say don't?" But I didn't need her to answer. I already knew. Annie Burrows had not been speaking to me. And if you want to discover the dark secrets that Grayswick's dead no longer wish to keep, the hardback is out now and the paperback is out on the 15th of October. Thank you very much for listening. Back to you, Vic.
Thank you so much for that, Anita. We're actually going to stay with you for a moment because
Oh, yeah.
Susan from the Book Trail would like to know,
Hi,
how
Susan.
did you come up with Grayswick? Have you visited somewhere like it?
The house, no, the name, there is actually a place quite near me called Rotherfield Grays, and I was driving through there as I was writing the book one day, and I liked the word Grays, and then Wick popped into my head, so that's where Grayswick comes from. The house itself, I didn't want it to be a house that was crumbling and decrepit like they often are in ghost stories. I wanted it to be repulsive and over opulent. And I hadn't been anywhere that sort of was particularly sprung to mind, but I did find a place in, I think it's Northamptonshire, and it's Overton Hall, I think it's called, which is actually a wreck now. But in its day, it was an absolute monstrosity created by this wife who actually died before she got to live in it, and the husband refused to live in it because he thought it was so disgusting and it was so over the top that he, after she had died, he actually said he's never going to step foot in it and he hated it. So I quite like that, but yeah, it's not based on an actual place.
Brill. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Lovely, thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Okay. Are we still rolling the drums? I hope so. Because up next is Essie Moorhead. Essie Moorhead uses writing as bubblegum for her overactive brain to keep it out of trouble. Very wise. Fascinated by meaning, motivation and mystery, she studied theology at university. Apart from teaching in a secondary school, Essie Moorhead has attained a black belt in kickboxing, worked as a school chaplain, runs a youth group and stops people in the street to talk to their dogs. Her novel Witness X is currently 99p on Amazon. So everybody, huge round of applause for Essie Moorhead.
Hello, thanks so much for doing this. This is a great evening and we're very happy to be here. My book Witness X is about a woman who designs technology to go into witnesses' minds to see directly their experiences of a crime. And there is a bit of, I'm going to read a bit about from a serial killer's point of view, and there will be a little bit about somebody who's being kidnapped. So if you don't feel comfortable, maybe switch off for a bit. He's waiting for her at the bus stop near the hospital, almost pulls her from the step in his eagerness, wraps himself around her. He's handsome, older than her, and I wonder for a moment if I've made a mistake, but then I see her face in profile, a reluctance, a wariness. She leans away from him slightly. An old man in between us is struggling to alight. I reach out my arm to guide him, and he takes it gratefully, his wrinkly face smooths momentarily with a smile, reflecting my own well-practiced one. I move towards the hospital in a slipstream of people, but duck out to stand close to the couple as he corrals her outside the entrance, his face earnest. He has a few admiring looks from women passing by. It might be the uniform he wears. They probably think he's a doctor. I study my mini screen, raising my head intermittently, pretending I'm waiting for someone so that I can listen in. I shift my feet slightly. I found that if I stand too still, people notice that something's not quite right. As they talk, I swipe through the photographs I've collected of her. Yoga at the Wellbeing Centre, in the gym, going to the Farmer's Arms with her friends, working at the hospital. I've been this close to her twice before, once in a queue at a shop, and once when I was handing out anti-poverty leaflets in the street. I stole them from a protester so that I could get close to her. That time I got to look in her eyes. I've even sat in the waiting room, another faceless patient, but she didn't ever seem to notice that my name was never called. This is the closest I've been to them when they've been together. Have you thought more about my offer, Isabel? He asks, moving his face in front of hers when she looks away so she can't avoid his gaze. Isabel, such a beautiful name. Please say you'll move in with me, he whines. I've heard her speak before, but every time it gets me in the guts like a beautiful piece of music that moves me. I need to concentrate on my studies first, Andrew. Let's talk about it after that. She nods as if to verify her words, or maybe to appease him. He takes her hands and holds them in his own together in front of her as though he's praying, and I'm reminded of the statue at the children's home of the Virgin Mary, her pale hair and blue eyes not unlike Isabel's. On the ring finger of his left hand there is a white indentation, a history in pigmentation, a warning. Don't go out tonight, stay in with me. We'll get some food, wine, have a cosy night in. But I promised the girls I'd go out with them. She pulls her hands away from him and loosens the collar of her coat as she talks. Can't we meet in the canteen when you finished your shift? You are not worthy of her, Andrew. Give them a miss tonight. I need you more than they do, he says. Anyway, the Farmer's Arms is a dump. Wouldn't you rather be with me? That is all the information I need. Tonight is the night. And then just another little bit. Pain explodes in her skull, forcing her awake. She peels open her eyes, but the darkness is thick and unrelenting. Lifting her arms to rub her face, her muscles feel weak and heavy. She is in a deep dream and cannot rouse herself. Where is she? Where has she been? She blinks and widens her eyes, but she is still blind. What time is it? How much did she drink last night? She only meant to have a few. She should be studying today. How can she do that with a hangover? She reaches out a hand for a comm set to put the light on, but instead of finding her bedside drawers beside her, her knuckles hit something hard and resistant. Feeling a growing panic rising and desperately trying to find some light, she raises her head, but it makes contact with something above her, and a metallic hollow rumble terrifies her. She lies still for a moment, listening to her own heart as it slowly beats out time, feeling doped and wondering has she been spiked at the pub. Where is she? Tentatively, she raises her arms above her head. She doesn't have to reach far to find ice cold metal smooth beneath her fingertips. It stretches as far above her body as she can feel. In fearful clarity, she recognizes she is surrounded, encased by unrelenting steel. She can hear screaming bouncing off the metal casing, and it's only when her throat burns that she realizes the howling sound is coming from her own mouth. Suddenly there is movement nearby, and the clanging, banging sounds terrify her. She struggles harder to move her body, but her muscles will not respond. The door of the metal box is thrown open, and brightness floods in, scorching her eyes. She thought she would feel relieved when she finally saw the light. Instead, there is no escape from it, and she's completely vulnerable in her blindness. There is someone there with her. Her slight body trembles in the metal tray as it's pulled out. The vibrations of the wheels rattle through her bones. The thin sheets and the cold make her feel even more vulnerable. Laid out on the table, she reaches down, not understanding why she can't move her legs, and feels thick straps across her waist and the lower half of her body. She raises her hands weakly in a futile attempt to shield herself. An antiseptic smell fills her nostrils as the shape blocks the light and her fear peaks. Her ears still ring with her own terrified screams. Her pupils, flooded with light, are useless. She half closes her eyes and tries desperately to focus, to see something to help her understand. When she looks behind her, she sees the receptacle she's been held in, so familiar to her at the hospital, a mortuary fridge, and she thinks, I'm going to die. And that's that for now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Again, just to remind you, Witness X is currently 99p on Amazon should you wish to download it. Okay, who's next? Drums, drums. All the way from New Zealand, it's Vanda Simon. Vanda Simon is a New Zealand crime writer from Dunedin, but we won't hold that against her. She is the author of the Detective Sam Shepherd books and has been shortlisted for the CWA Dagger Awards and the Nagayo Marsh Awards. Woo! I'm absolutely delighted. I think it's about 6:30 in the morning or something preposterous like that. So huge thanks and big round of applause, but not too loud, she might still be asleep. Vanda Simon!
Kia ora, Nisa Bulavanaka, everybody. Welcome from tomorrow morning, which seems very, very weird. I'm going to be reading today from my novel Containment, and this is the third book in my Detective Sam Shepherd series. And Sam Shepherd, she's a young woman detective, quite early on the scale of being a detective out there. Now, I should give you a little warning. There is a little bit of sweariness in the reading that I'm giving you today. Jesus bloody Christ. Beaches were supposed to be pristine stretches of white sand and dotted with colourful shells, artfully strewn scraps of seaweed, cast up driftwood, the only sounds the waves gently lapping the idyllic shore. Beaches were supposed to be havens of isolation and tranquility. Beaches were supposed to be, well, anything but this. The sight before my eyes made me promise to God I would never complain about finding a dog turd on a beach again. A dog turd would be good. A dog turd would be easy. This was, well, where did I start? I stood at the top of the wooden steps that led down to the spit. There must have been 200 people roaming along the sand, and it looked like even more were up on the mole, going by the number of cars parked stupidly and illegally anywhere and everywhere. It was as if half of Dunedin had simultaneously chosen to take an early Sunday morning joyride to Aramoana, except that it wasn't a joyride. Looking at people's faces, there was nothing joyous about it at all. There was awe, anger, disgust, and straight out greed on those faces, but not joy. There was only one reason they were here, and that reason was so vastly out of place, so incongruous, that my mind was trying every trick it could try to convince me that no, that wasn't a bloody great container ship stuck on the end of the mole, and no, those weren't shipping containers stranded on the beach. How the hell could this have happened? There hadn't been a storm to wreak havoc and drive the ship off course. And anyway, when the weather was that severe, they closed the Tairoa Head entrance to shipping. I stumbled my way around the debris. There were books, clothes, furniture, loose papers wafting around like oversized confetti, toys, smashed ornaments, candles, wine barrels, nondescript cartons, unidentifiable tat, and people. People everywhere, sifting through the goods casually like they were searching through the titbits on offer at their neighbour's garage sale. My eyes kept darting to the ship and its precarious lean. I don't know if it was an optical illusion, but it looked huge and close, and my pre-caffeine brain grappled with the spectacle. It was hard to figure out what was stranger in this catalogue of the bizarre, the ship, or the car on its roof and the drink with its wheels saluting the sky. I took it from the presence of a fire engine and a few blue uniformed officers that the car situation was under control. The driver's owner was lucky it was shallow there, and even more lucky that tides and weather had dumped sand over the jagged rocks. The police presence was small. It was early and a Sunday, and I was guessing that there hadn't been time for the Dunedin Central Police Station to mobilise more staff and get them out here to Aramoana. Hey John, what's happening? Bloody mayhem, that's what's happening. The sooner we get more backup out here, the better. I don't know what the hell's taken them so long. In all my years, I have never seen behaviour like this. So much for us being a civilised people. Where can I help? Further up the beach would be good. He pointed in the general direction of the cribs down the end of the spit. Make sure no one's doing anything too dangerous. There aren't enough of us to stop the looting. Just do what you can. At least we've got this patch contained finally. Well, what happened here, I asked, moving towards the taped off area. Old lady found a human skull in amongst the pile of crap. We've cordoned off as much as we can until the soccos arrive. And it just kept getting weirder. Even with the police presence, people continued to drag objects out of the containers. They probably figured the few police there had bigger things to worry about than their pilfering. But still, I'd never seen such blatant audacity before. They were clearly letting greed outweigh brains, because if they'd bothered to think about it, there was only one road in and out of the town, and it would likely be jammed up as hell and have a checkpoint on it. So unless they were prepared to swim with their booty, all it was going to achieve was a criminal record and public humiliation. My eyes couldn't decide what to rest on as I walked further along the beach. They flitted from the boat to the beach to the boxes. The side of the ship across from the mole was straight out freaky. The scale of something that big blocking the harbour made the surrounding land, houses and cars seem Lilliputian. It looked like someone had photoshopped a bloody great leaning tower onto an otherwise unsuspecting landscape. Then there was the beach, strewn with pillaged containers, junk, damaged goods, motorbikes, toys, furniture, packs of disposable nappies, you name it, it was here. God, give me strength and coffee. The sound of raised voices induced me to break into a trot. The tone and volume indicated things were getting a bit heated. I came around the edge of a container to see a tug of war going on between a guy in his 20s and another man in his 50s. The object of their desire was a sizable cardboard carton that rattled with a suspiciously non-intact sound as it jerked from one combatant to the next. Get your hands off it, you thieving little bastard. I got it first. Let go, you stupid old coot. Excuse me, what's going on here, I said, although it was pretty apparent. With all this stuff strewn everywhere and cartons as far as the eye could see, they'd decided to fight over the same box. How very adult. How very illegal. The older guy filled me in on the details, speaking through gritted teeth and the overhang of his grey walrus moustache. The strain of the tussle very apparent on his face. This little shit is trying to take off with the box and I'm buggered if I'm going to let him. Tell Grandpa here to get his own fucking box. I got it first. I thought the younger guy was quite attractive with his curly dark hair and brooding brown eyes, until he opened his mouth. Well, I hate to inform you, I said, moving around between them, that it belongs to neither of you, and I'm going to have to ask you both to put it down. At that, the young guy flicked his eyes in my direction. Then he returned them back to the task at hand. Fuck off and get your own box. Nice manners, I said, trying to keep my blood pressure down. Let me introduce myself. I'm Detective Constable Shepherd. What you're doing is theft, and if you continue, I'm going to have to arrest you. So put the box down. That's what I've been trying to tell the little shit. It's not his property and he can't take it, and he won't bloody listen. None of them will. Moustache guy, with a look of immense relief, let go of the box, sending the younger chap back a couple of steps. He still wouldn't put the thing down though. He looked around, checked the various people busy on the beach, then looked back at me, giving the old up and down before pointedly turning to walk off. Hey, I yelled, did you hear me? You keep walking and I'll have to arrest you. Try it, he said with a voice that was more threat than invitation. Oh, bloody hell, I said as I ran alongside him and grabbed at the carton. Put it down right now. I wasn't used to having my authority flouted, and it wasn't doing anything for my mood. I might have been a fraction of his size, but I wasn't about to be walked away from by anyone. Fuck off, he said as he jerked the carton away from my grasp. Let it go. Now it was me gritting my teeth as I reached and got a grip on it again. Once again, he flicked it to the side, pulling me off balance, forcing me to let go to avoid a dive into the sand. Okay, you're starting to piss me off, I said, my dander rising. I warned you. I'll arrest you if you don't stop what you're doing. I made one more grab for the carton. Let go of the box right now. Before I could register what was happening, he did let go, and as I dealt with the unexpected weight of the carton, he swung round and punched me right in the side of the face, hard. White-hot stars and searing pain exploded in my head, and the next thing I felt was cold, wet sand as my cheek hit the beach. My water-filled and swirling vision took in the sight of Moustache Guy tackling my assailant and getting in a few hits before the red curtain descended and the lights went out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for appearing what is tonight, Vanda, but technically from the future. I mean, amazing time travel, love it. Okay, we're on to our final person, and this time, big drum roll, while I unfold this. It's S.J. Watson. I'm so excited, can you tell? Okay, compose yourself, Vic. I'm sure all of you know this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. S.J. Watson's first novel, Before I Go to Sleep, became a phenomenal international success and has now sold over 6 million copies worldwide. Woo! There just isn't a big enough woo in the world. It won the Crime Writers Association Award for Best Debut Novel and the Galaxy National Book Award for Crime Thriller of the Year. Woo! The film of the book, starring Nicole Kidman, Colin Firth and Mark Strong, was directed by Rowan Joff, was released in September 2014. Tonight, S.J. Watson is with us on the eve of his publication for his new novel, Final Cut, and we are delighted to welcome him into our virtual bar. So everybody, huge, huge, huge round of applause for S.J. Watson.
Hi. Can you hear me? Excellent. Thank you for that introduction. That was great. So I'm going to read from Final Cut, which, as you said, is out tomorrow. I'm going to read from about sort of quarter of the way through the book, but we join our main character, Alex, who's a documentary filmmaker, and she's been sent to Blackwood Bay, which is a small fishing village in the northeast of England, to make her new film. But once there, she becomes very intrigued by the story of some missing girls that disappeared 10 years previously, one of whom was thought to have committed suicide by jumping from the cliffs. And we join her when she's on her way for the first time to visit the guy who lives in the house that is right next to the spot that the girl Daisy jumped from. So she is just trying to visit this guy called David. There's no answer. David, I say, peering through the stained glass, are you there? Nothing. I wait, then try again. I knock at the door so loudly this time that it judders against the frame, rattling the letterbox. Now there's a noise. It sounds odd, like it's coming from deep in the house, or beyond it somehow. A light flicks on in the hall. Then through the pus-coloured pane of glass, I see a figure approach, head down, blurry and wraith-like. Only when he's right in front of me, when all that's separating us is the door itself, does he look up. His features are indistinct, distorted by the window. He slides a bolt and the door opens a fraction, held back by a chain. Yes? His voice is thin and reedy. Is that David? What do you want? I can't see him well. The hall light is behind him. The porch is in darkness. He's tall, though, and thin, his body angular and his movements awkward. I try to keep my voice even. Hi, I say. I hope you don't mind me interrupting you. I hold out my hand, but he makes no move to take it, and I'm relieved. I don't want him to touch me. His attention seems focused on a spot a little way beyond me. I'm Alex. I know who you are. He leans forward. His thin face catches the moonlight. His complexion is waxy. He looks bleached, overexposed. He gives me the creeps and I fight the urge to run as hard and as fast as I can until I'm miles away. Why have you come here? To find out about Daisy, I think, about Zoe. I drop my hand and he flinches. His eyes dart with a feverish intensity, though he avoids looking at me directly. He scans my neck, my cheek, the side of my head, anywhere but my eyes. He doesn't blink. Even in the dim light, I notice a patch of stubble on his neck where the razor missed, a tiny scar above his lip. He seems desperate to escape, even though he's standing in his own home and I'm the one who's trespassing. I just wanted to ask you about why have you come to Blackwood Bay? I open my mouth, but the words catch in my throat. Nothing will come out. You need to get out. His voice quivers. He sounds odd, scared, drunk perhaps. What? It's not safe for you here. You shouldn't have come. His tone is menacingly low. I lean in just a little, though my body is pulling against me. I want to talk to you. Leave. You should never. Wait, I say. He's closing the door. I'm desperate. My chance to speak to him is disappearing. You knew Zoe Pearson. No, he says. No, I'd never. Not after what happened. What happened? He says nothing. Talk to me. I glance towards the edge of the cliff. Daisy jumped from here, didn't she? He shakes his head. He looks haunted. David, I say, please, will you help me? I can't, he says. I can't. Leave me alone. He lets the door go and it snaps shut. The house shivers. I peer in through the glass, but all I can see is his silhouette, the back of his head. I lean in close. I know my words won't be picked up by the camera, but I'm not sure that matters now. My focus has shifted. I need to know what happened to Daisy, my friend, and to Zoe. Tell me what happened to the girls, David. He speaks then. You should know, he says. You should know more than anyone. I don't react. I can't. What does he mean? In any case, the light goes off and the house falls silent once more. I walk away, back to my camera. It's not possible. He can't have recognised me, surely. Not in the half light, not if I didn't recognise him. He can't be the one person in Blackwood Bay who knows who I am. But then it comes to me. What if he's not? What if I'm kidding myself? I look back towards the house and see something there, a figure half hidden in the dark. It's David, I think, and again I want to run, but then I realise I'm wrong. It's not David at all, but a girl. She's just standing, watching me. I take a step towards her, but my feet are suddenly heavy, mired in the sludge. I don't know what makes me, but I almost say it. Daisy? The word catches in my throat, and when I look again, there's no one. Nothing at all. The place is deserted. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that with us. We have got a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. Catherine would like to know, was Blackwood Bay in the novel set in a coastal town that you visited, or is it completely fictitious?
That's a really interesting question. It's a kind of an amalgamation. It's based quite heavily on a place called Robin Hood's Bay, which is in North Yorkshire, which you may well know, yeah. Which I think is such a beautiful place. And it's kind of a strange, weird, magical place, which is one of the reasons I wanted to sort of set a book there. But then I realised, given the stuff that actually happens there in the book, I wouldn't sort of want to actually set it there, because I think people there would never speak to me again, and quite rightly. So I decided to fictionalise it, which also gave me that bit of separation, that bit of distance. But it's most heavily based on Robin Hood's Bay, with perhaps a little bit of places like St Ives, places like that sort of mixed in.
Thank you. And Jackie McLean would like to know, did any real life events inspire the storyline for Final Cut?
Well, yes, in a way. I mean, I don't know whether the person asked the question has read the book or not, but I mean, there are some pretty dark stuff that happens. Unfortunately, it's one of those books it's difficult to talk about, because I don't want to give away what happens, what the truth is behind it. But I didn't put anything in there that hasn't happened at some point to somebody. And actually, when I started researching the stuff that's going on, what I found was actually I couldn't be too realistic, because it would have just been, I mean, it's dark enough as it is, but it would have just been impossible. You know, so it wasn't inspired by a particular event, no. But actually most of the stuff that, in fact, everything in there has happened and does happen. So
excellent.
Yeah, kind of.
Thank you very much for joining us, and best of luck for publication tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay, so after that, we are now going to go for a quick 5-minute break. Don't forget, if you want to be in with a chance of winning a free book, please email us. I haven't asked you to put a particular subject heading in today. Just drop us an email at vnatb20@gmail.com. And this is my weekly plea. I'm just going to get it out there. If you would like to help us fund the virtual bar, that's the Ko-fi link. I'll put it in the chat and say no more. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in 5 minutes.
band Bojangles and he danced for you. In his worn out shoes, with silver hair and ragged shirt and baggy pants, he would do the old soft shoe. He would jump so high, then he'd lightly touch down. He told me of the time he worked with minstrel shows, traveling throughout the South. He spoke with tears of 15 years, how his dog and he, they would travel about. But his dog up and died. Oh, got up and died. And after 15 years he still breathed. He said, I mostly dance now in these honky-tonks for my drinks and tips. Most of the time I spend behind these county bars. You see, son, I drinks a bit. Then he shook his head. Oh, when he shook his head, I can swear I heard somebody say, please, Mr. Bojangles. Mr. Bojangles, come back and dance. Please dance and dance and dance. Mr. Bojangles, call him Mr. Bojangles. Mr. Bojangles, come back and dance. Please dance and dance and dance. Across the sea, it lingered there to touch your hair and walk with me. All summer long we sang a song, then we strolled that golden sand. Two sweethearts and the summer wind, like painted kites, those days and nights, they went flying by. The world was new beneath the blue umbrella sky. Then softer than a piper man, one day it called to you. I lost you to the summer wind. The autumn wind and the winter winds, they have come and gone.
I jumped the gun a bit because I thought we were coming straight back after Jason Isaacs' first song. I was wrong. So I've just shook the hat there, as you've seen. Helen Fields is up next. And technically this is Helen's second VNATB outing because she also read at the Lime Crime VNATB that we did, I think it was last month. Helen Fields practiced criminal and family law as a barrister, but these days is better known as the author of the D.I. Calenach series set in Scotland. She also writes as H.S. Chandler and last year published her first legal thriller, Degrees of Guilt. She's currently longlisted for the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award for Perfect Kill. Woo! And I'll just point out that Helen wrote this introduction, and this is not me saying this. What it says here is, she will find out tomorrow that she hasn't been shortlisted, so she's going to get very drunk after this tonight. I'm sure many of you, like me, disagree with Helen, and hopefully we'll have much to celebrate tomorrow, but please, huge round of applause for Helen Fields.
There we go. I am unmuted. Hello, hello. Thank you so much, Vic. Thank you for inviting me back. Simon, thank you for doing all the little, techie stuff. And thanks to all the other brilliant authors and readers who I have loved listening to. I can't actually get drunk tonight because I neglected buying the alcohol. So stupid me. I'm going to have to get drunk tomorrow instead. I know, yeah, boo. I can see all my, the author, lovely author guys. Anyway, have a drink for me, anyone at home. And I am going to read to you from my next book that's coming out. It comes out on February the 4th next year. It seems like a long way away. It's called The Shadow Man. I'm going to read from chapter 4. Couple of trigger warnings. This is about a woman who has been kidnapped. There seems to be a lot of that with very sick people, as crime writers. And she is just having an encounter with the man who kidnapped her. So here we go. "Marry me," the man said. Elizabeth Dunwoody was doing her best not to gag. The food he was feeding her was stale and rank. Her body was still in the process of attempting to oust whatever chemicals he'd forced into her on her friend's driveway. Since then, she'd been going through phases, all of them extremes, each passing through her with the speed and force of an express train. Currently, she was numb and sick. For some reason, she was finding it impossible to fathom there was a stranger on one knee in front of her, presenting a ring in a box. She turned her head to one side and gagged, almost losing the flat square of cheese and the few dry crackers that had been her lunch. He didn't even seem to notice. "Marry me," he repeated. Elspeth peered at the ring. The gold band had tarnished and worn thin, and the single stone had no luster, sitting forlorn and grey in the spindly golden claws. She lifted her own left hand and waggled her fingers, knuckle-side, to his face, showing off the ring that was already lodged there. "I can fix that," he said, a bottle of liquid soap appearing from the floor at his side. He squirted a generous amount onto his own palm, then rubbed it onto her ring finger. Her wedding and engagement rings, those 24-carat traitors, slipped off without a moment's hesitation. A quick toweling dry, and he pushed on his ring of choice. She wished she still had enough bile in her stomach to be sick over her new accessory, but her body wasn't performing to command. "Ceremony," he mumbled. She gazed at him through the soreness of dehydrated, tear-blanched eyes, scrawny, with sallow skin that would reject sunlight, and sunken eyes sat atop the twin brown half-moons of insomnia and malnutrition. His hand shook as he wandered around, picking up one object and setting down another, murmuring to himself constantly. "Didn't get shoes," he said, slapping his own face hard. The sound echoed against the bare brickwork. The floor was tatty old carpet, scratchy beneath her one bare foot. Her absent shoe was in a bush waiting to be discovered, and in her mind it had become a living thing, lying quietly as it looked anxiously skywards, hoping for a face to peer down and notice it, rescuing it gently. That shoe was her message in a bottle. She'd bought the pair only 2 weeks earlier, loving the softness of them as she had admired their bright yellow canvas and black elastic laces. They'd been an extravagance, but then she'd never had to worry about money. She'd never had to worry about anything before, she realized now. Wealth and privilege had shielded her from everything except illness and the more distressing news broadcasts. To combat those, she'd been an enthusiastic supporter of numerous charities. Over the years, she'd helped raise millions for social issues such as homelessness and child poverty, and made sure the new teenage cancer wing on a nearby hospital was completed to the highest standards, fully equipped and as homely as could be. "Put it on," the man said, laying a greying, too large wedding dress over her lap. Elspeth stared at it. "You want me to do what?" "Gonna get ready," was his reply. He shuffled through a doorway that led into a bedroom beyond. What the other rooms held, Elspeth hadn't discovered yet. Standing was painful. She spent the first 24 hours after abduction, bound and laid on her side, knees up, wrists roped behind her back. Her captor had carried her from driveway to vehicle and from there into a house. When her bindings were finally cut, she'd remained in position, moving only inch by inch, tendons stiff and muscle seized. In spite of regular yoga classes and trips to the gym, it had taken only that brief time to weaken her. Now she was undoing the zip on a wedding dress that surely hadn't been worn for decades. The lace was ripped and the stale yellow of old pub wallpaper. Stepping into it, she shed silent tears for her own husband. Her parting words to him had been snappy and churlish. She'd been desperate to return home and make things right with him. Now she might never have the chance. She pulled the dress up over her chest and slipped her arms into the puffy sleeves. A cloud of dust burst upwards into her face, leaving her choking. The smell was of attic and rodent droppings. "You look beautiful," the man said. He'd reappeared with ghost-like stealth around the door. Elspeth wrapped her arms around her waist. "Here, I'll zip you up. My brother should have been here. He'd have been my best man. That's something I'll have to fix later. Couldn't get to it in time for the wedding. Not the right time to feel sorry for ourselves, though, is it? Time to make this the first day of the rest of our lives together." His clothing was a perfect match for her dress in terms of age and state. The sleeves of his jacket ended inches up his arms, but the rest was too bulky for his frame. The blue and green kilt hung off him, no socks and too high over the knee. It had been made for someone short and round, whereas he might not have eaten for months, every bone digging at his skin from the inside. He had to be dying. The thought warned her. Moving to face her, he took hold of both her hands. Elspeth swayed slightly. On a different day, at a different venue, that sway had been taken as a sign of delirious happiness. She'd been a bride overcome by the emotion of the moment, the watching crowds, and the promise of a lifetime of love and devotion. Her parents had clutched one another joyfully, so certain of her choice of partner. A string quartet had played classical music, and her bridesmaids were her sister's twin girls, dressed in tea rose pink with daisies in their hair. Elspeth imagined her husband's face and wondered if she would ever touch it again. The man opposite her now coughed into her face with no thought for whether or not he should cover his mouth. Elspeth looked sideways at the bizarre painting on the wall and sang a song in her head. The words were a jumble in her mind, and she couldn't remember all of them. Her mother had sung it to her as a girl, something about cambric shirts and a sickle of leather. There was a tune and she wanted to hum it, but now the man was holding her hands and raising his head grandly and puffing out his chest, and oh, sweet God, he began speaking as loudly as if they were in a cathedral with 1,000 people watching their nuptials. Elspeth knew her mouth was hanging open as she stared, but there wasn't a threat he could issue that could wipe the horror and incredulity from her face. "Is there any person here present who knows of any reason why this man and this woman should not be joined in holy matrimony?" There was a pause. Elspeth had been alone with him in that room for what had seemed like forever, and she still felt the need to look around. There was no one. He was talking to absolutely no one. Still he paused, waiting for the appropriate amount of time in case of an interjection, stepping a few inches closer to her, lowering his head to look fiercely into his eyes. He began to recite his vows. And there we go. That is it from me. Vic, thank you so much. I'm handing back over to you.
No, you're not, Helen, because we've got a question from Keith Young. Keith says, "Helen, I love your books, but wonder how you plan the plots. Do you know before you start, or do you just go with it?"
I pretty much go with it. I do have a really good idea of kind of what the characters are going to go through. What I really have in my head is an idea of the personality of my bad guy. So I kind of know who they are, I know what motivates them, and I know what nasty things they're going to do. I have absolutely zero idea of what locations I'm going to end up at, and I never know how a book is going to resolve itself. until it actually does, which is a honestly wrong and painful way to write a book. But I'm not organised enough, patient enough, or clever enough, to be honest with you, to write it any other way.
Brilliant. I'm sure you are patient and clever and wonderful. Well, we think you are anyway. So thank you very much for being with us this evening. That was brilliant. Okie dokie, our penultimate reader this evening. The Hat, the Hat. Susan from the Book Trail usually helps me at the Real Bar, and Jackie Collins used to do it as well. And I really miss having a bud to do this with. That said, I have got Simon, but it's just not the same as having somebody walk around a bar just proffering a hat to people randomly. Anyway, so penultimate reader is Rebecca Fleet. Rebecca lives in southwest London and works in Windsor as a brand strategy consultant. She previously had 2 literary fiction novels published under a different name, but now writes psychological thrillers under the name Rebecca Fleet, and she is published by Transworld. Lee Child described The House Swap as dead-on domestic noir, full of tension and surprises. Ooh! And Erin Kelly referred to it as dark, smart, and sexy. And that's good enough for us. So everybody, huge round of applause for Rebecca Fleet.
Hi everyone, hope you can hear me okay. I'm going to actually be reading from The Second Wife, which is my new book, this one here. The paperback is out on the 20th of August. And I'm going to read 2 short extracts. So the first one is from Alex, who is the male narrator in the present day. And in this extract, which is very near the beginning of the novel, he has just returned home to find that his house is burning down. And sorry, I have a little guest with me, as you've seen. You can stay out of the way now. And yeah, so he's returned to find his house is burning down. His wife has managed to get out, but his daughter is still in there. So I run up to the black hole where our front door used to be, but I know it's useless. Even from several feet away, the smoke chokes me and makes me splutter, bending over double, my eyes streaming and smarting. It's too late. Trying to go further now is a suicide mission, nothing more. A shout is ripped from my throat, the sound ridiculous and impotent. Panic's flooding me like poison. This can't be it. There has to be some way I can get in there. I strain my eyes to peer inside the house, and this time I see the shadow of a man in what looks like a bulky uniform jacket and helmet struggling against the flames. I catch my breath, staring at the indistinct shape. It feels like hours, but it's probably only a few seconds before I see that he's carrying something in his arms. I see the shape of a pale arm hanging down, the fall of fair hair. It's her. There's a crushing sensation in my chest, a physical pain that I wouldn't have thought possible. The man's emerging from the fire, his head ducked down, and he's holding my daughter. I see her face in profile as he stumbles out into the air, a vivid slash of red across her hairline. Her cheek is miraculously and perfectly clear, but her eyes are closed and her lips are white and she isn't moving. Please stand back, sir. I've lurched forward again, fighting my way to her side, but the voice is authoritative and firm and it gives me pause. I swing round and see a paramedic in uniform, gesturing towards his colleagues, who are swarming around Jade at speed, blocking her from my view. Let them do their job. She's my daughter. I can barely get the words out. My eyes are sore, and despite the strange heat of the air, I'm shivering violently. The man places a hand on my shoulder and grips it. They got her out, he says. I nod, looking into the stranger's eyes, feeling an odd moment of connection. Still gripping me, he steers me carefully around the group, then holds me back at arm's length as he bends in and speaks quietly to one of his colleagues. A moment later, he beckons me forward. She's unconscious, but breathing, he says. His words give me a sick, dizzy swoop of relief. I have no idea if it's really warranted or not, and by the looks of it, nor does he. Good news, bad news. Neither of us knows the difference. What are they doing? I managed to ask. A man is bent over Jade, performing what looks like a quick succession of confessions on her chest. Another is checking her pulse. I have no idea what these actions add up to, whether they're futile or whether they're going to save her life. The paramedic squeezes my arm, a brief, unspoken moment of solidarity. They'll do whatever they can. You can come with us in the ambulance to the hospital along with your wife. She was in there for a while. They want to check her out too. I glance round and see Natalie being guided towards the ambulance, tears streaming down her face. Guilt and anger rush up through me, too tightly bound together to unravel. I nod, following the men as they lift Jade carefully onto a stretcher and carry her to the vehicle. I slide into the seat at the back, clasping my hands tightly together as I stare at her motionless face. I know I shouldn't touch her, but I've never wanted to hold her so badly in my life. The ambulance lurches forward and all at once we're whizzing through the streets, faster than I'd expected. Here in the back, it's hot and windowless, and I close my eyes, feeling a lurch of nausea. I can smell Natalie's perfume in the air, the cool, seductive scent she always wears. Something about it acts as a trigger, forcing my eyes open again. She's staring at me, mutely appealing for forgiveness. I can't quite give it yet, but I reach out my hand and touch the back of hers, briefly stroking the skin. What happened? I ask quietly, but she just shakes her head and raises her hands in a strange, useless gesture, grasping at nothing as if she's looking for the answer in the air around us. What happened? I say again, my tone rougher this time. I don't know, she says at last. I don't know how it happened. The ambulance weaves on, and above our heads the strip lights are flickering, brightness ebbing and flowing like the aftermath of a camera flash. Next to me, Natalie shifts in her seat, leans forward and clasps her hands together, blinking fast, whispering to herself. I look at her profile, her clenched jaw. This woman with the trembling hands and the tears drying in streaks. My wife, but not the mother of my child. Not the one who would have found her, no matter where she was. Now I'm going to read a little second extract, and this is from a different narrator. This is from the past part of the narrative, about 17 years earlier, and it features a narrator called Sadie, who is connected to the present day, but at this point we don't know why. And this is basically what's happening is that she's been told by Kaz, who is the owner of a nightclub with whom she's infatuated, that she has to find this man called George in the club and bring her to him because they want to talk. Sadie is basically just acting on her instructions. She doesn't really know what's going on, and she's a bit scared. Okay. Curling her fingers more tightly into the man's palm, she glances back at him. He looks confused and eager, almost grateful, and for an instant she's pulled up short. She's not sure at all of what she's doing. But now they're at the steps and she's pushing the door open and slipping quietly in, unobserved in the dark corner, and pulling him after her. Together they descend the staircase and she sees another door to her right, left ajar so that dim light spills out across the floor from the room beyond. Here, she says. George's hands are around her waist now, drawing her against him. She backs against the door and pushes it open. He's lost his earlier finesse, his touch rough and almost aggressive. She leads him into the room, a small stone-wall storage cabin, almost bare but for a pile of boxes stacked at one end, a corner table and a lamp. In an instant, as the door slams behind them, she sees Kaz, standing silently in the corner, leaning back against the wall. Even though she's been expecting it, the sight of him makes her body jolt in shock. She gasps and George immediately lets go of her. He swings round and she sees him visibly stiffen and goes still. He does not speak. Sadie looks at Kaz, but his gaze is fixed on George. In another moment, she feels hands on her shoulders guiding her away. Twisting around, she sees that it's Dominic. He's pushing her back towards the door, and at first, her mind groping for comprehension, she doesn't resist. In the half-light of the basement, time seems to slow and stop. Everything around her is motionless, and she hears the faint, muffled thud of music above, seeping through the ceiling. Her head swims, and then she's suddenly terrified. The fear makes her struggle, kicking out against Dominic, and she hears her own breathing coming hard and fast. Even as she resists, she knows there's no point. He's stronger than her, much stronger, and she's not sure enough of what she's fighting against. After that, everything happens very fast. She's pushed outside the door, and Dominic comes with her, closing it tightly behind them. He holds her only by the wrist now, but his fingers clutch around the bone like iron. He tells her to be quiet, and somewhere in the back of her head she thinks this is strange because she hasn't spoken a word. Her legs are shaking, threatening to collapse below her. They stand there together outside the door for 2 minutes, maybe 3. Dominic's eyes never leave the dark summit of the staircase. She feels a powerful impulse to run, and the need is so strong that she shifts an inch or two towards the stairs. "Let me go," she whispers, so quietly that she cannot be sure that Dominic has heard. He makes no reply, but his grip on her tightens. She looks at him and sees his face, calm and set, his glassy eyes fixed somewhere above her head, as if she's not trembling beside him, as if she's not there at all. A knock comes from the other side of the door. With silent efficiency, Dominic swings round and pushes it open. Kaz is there, his face oddly alert and searching. He says something that she doesn't catch. And then they are all inside the little room again, and for just a fraction of a second before the 2 men move forwards to block her view, she sees it, the shape of a body underneath a rough sheet of sacking, perfectly still. For a few hectic seconds, the pieces don't fit together. Her eyes flicker around the room, searching for George, back and forth, each image like the snap of a camera inside her head. There is no one moment when she understands, only a deepening fear and shock that numbs her from head to toe. She's shuddering. She doesn't realise how much until Kaz puts his hand on her arm. "Go back upstairs," he says. "Stay by the door for a few minutes and then go home." The words are innocent enough, but every one of them pierces her like a knife. She feels Kaz's fingers under her chin, tipping up her face to meet his. "You did well, Sadie," he says. "You'll keep this to yourself." She thinks there's just the faintest quaver of a question in the last word, a tiny rise in his inflection that seems to demand an answer, but she cannot make herself nod. "You must understand, Sadie," Kaz says. He's very close to her now, his hand sliding down to grip her shoulders, and he speaks intently, his voice low and steady. "This is all a question of loyalty. Some people are disloyal. These people are not worth caring about. They may be useful to make an example of, but that is all. For a fraction of a second, his eyes roll over to the sheet of sacking before his gaze snaps back to her. And others, he says, this time he looks deliberately towards Dominic, standing rigid at the doorway, his face expressionless. Others are loyal. Which are you, Sadie? That's all from me. Thank you very much. And back to Vic.
Thank you so much for that, Rebecca. And everybody's loving your tiny guest. Don't roll your eyes.
Yeah, sorry about my tiny guest. She was overexcited.
don't roll your eyes at all. Everybody's delighted. Thank you. So our final reader of the night is still in the hat. And it is, surprisingly, Joseph Knox. Apparently, him and Effie Merrill like that. Anyway, Joseph Knox was born and raised in and around Stoke-on-Trent and Manchester, where he worked in bars and bookshops before writing his debut novel Sirens, featuring disgraced detective Aidan Waits. Joseph runs, writes, and reads compulsively. I'm guessing he doesn't do all of those things at once. But anyway, our final reader tonight is the wonderful Joseph Knox.
Hello, I'm hoping that I'm unmuted. Excellent. So I'm reading from something so new that it is yet to be announced, but it is a book called True Crime Story. It will be out in 2021, and the setup is essentially that the book is designed to read as though it's a true crime book, and it's completely made up of interviews with the friends and family of a young woman who went missing in 2011. So I will read you the introduction. In the early hours of Saturday, December 17th, 2011, Zoe Nolan, a 19-year-old Manchester University student, walked out of a party taking place in the shared accommodation where she had been living for 3 months. She was never seen again. On the surface, Zoe had everything in the world going for her. In September of that year, she travelled from Stoke-on-Trent to Manchester, realising a long-held ambition to live in the city. She moved into a high-rise student apartment with her twin sister Kimberly and 2 other girls who quickly became her closest friends. Singing had always been the great passion of Zoe's life, and she'd moved to Manchester to more seriously study music, finding herself unexpectedly popular with course mates and around campus. Her contemporaries found her talent and dedication impressive, and she soon met the young man who had become her first real boyfriend. She passed 3 seemingly happy months in this state, right up until December 17th, the day her parents arrived to take her home for the Christmas holidays, only to find that she had vanished without a trace. I'd never heard of Zoe Nolan, or if I had, I'd forgotten all about her. In 2011, the year when she went missing, I would have been 25 years old, and myself living in Manchester, if you could really call what I was doing living. I certainly wasn't making my dreams come true. I was making minimum wage plus tips in a basement dive bar and putting every penny I earned back into the business. Manchester had made me, for better or worse. It was the first place I'd ever had my heart broken. It was the first place I'd ever had my nose broken. And somehow that encapsulated so much of what I loved about the city. There's a kind of toughness on one hand and a kind of romance on the other. There was, it was like a man with love and hate tattooed onto his knuckles, and you never knew which one he might hit you with next. The city always struck me as a lot of different things. Some of them were good and some of them were bad. But make no mistake about it, the city always struck me. As a result, so much of it's a blur now. There are whole years I don't really remember, whole jobs, whole people, whole places, much less news broadcasts, much less front page headlines, much less police appeals for information. So when I looked Zoe Nolan up some 6 years after her disappearance, I found that all I really remembered was her image. She was an almost iconic missing person blonde. Almost iconic, but sadly not quite. I had no idea what lay behind her frozen smile, and no idea what lay behind her disappearance. I had no idea that she'd go on to keep me up at night, and no idea that she'd go on to get a good friend of mine killed. Her story was sad, certainly, but hardly sensational. In my experience, both fictional and factual, girls went missing all the time. As a crime writer, missing girls were more or less my stock in trade. Morbidly, I suppose I expected Zoe to turn up somewhere, even all those years on. Not alive necessarily, but at least as a dead body. An almost classic death to match her almost classic missing person picture. I expected the mysteries of her life and disappearance to be untangled and normalized. I expected her to be rendered mundane by the great villain of our age, a man who had watched her too closely, a man who had taken things too far, a man who had transformed his dark fantasies into a sad and disturbing reality. If I hadn't met Evelyn Mitchell, I wouldn't have given the story any more thought than that. Hers was the first hand in the air at the Manchester Q&A for my debut novel, Sirens. I signed her book and we exchanged email addresses. Evelyn, it turned out, was a writer too, the author of You Are Not Here, a scathing first novel about male excess that had been well reviewed but sold so little that her publisher stopped returning her calls. A few years had passed and she was no longer the bright young thing who had been touted for success by broadsheet newspapers. Now she was standing in line waiting for me, just as in a few years I'd find myself standing in line waiting for someone else. She had struggled, she said, to find the right project for her second book, struggled with what she saw as her own slow fade into obscurity, until one day she'd found herself thinking, well, what happens to these girls who go missing? What happens to the Zoe Nolans of the world? I encouraged her because I could sense a desperation, because I wanted to be kind. But as my focus shifted onto my own work, I increasingly found cause to break our dates, excuses not to meet for coffee or for drinks. I put our relationship, whatever it was, on ice. I routinely lost track of people and time, but perhaps that's letting myself off the hook too easily. Brutally, my own career had stalled, and in Evelyn's one-room squat, in her frayed clothes and abandoned projects, I felt like I could see the dim outline of my own future, a future with no more successes and no more highs, just unanswered calls and rejection letters, just limitless, endless lows. Our conversation cooled, our emails going from weekly occurrences to monthly ones, from quarterly to almost nothing at all. Then, on June 25th, 2018, an email arrived into my inbox with an intriguing subject: True Crime Story. Evelyn had spent the last 12 months talking with a wide range of Zoe's friends and acquaintances, interviewing everyone she could find, anyone who'd speak to her on the record. And as she did, a complex, contradictory picture began to emerge, where some versions of events overlapped, aligning perfectly with one another. Others stood in stark contrast, giving rise to troubling inconsistencies. I began to understand that even those closest to Zoe Nolan had never known her empirical truth, or perhaps that they had each only known their own part of it. I began to understand how Zoe had been forced to keep secrets from those she loved, and perhaps how she could ultimately even disappear into thin air. But something was missing. In spite of the revelations in Evelyn's story, there was still no conclusion in sight, and it fell to me to tell her the truth, to unknowingly set my friend on the path toward her own destruction. I told Evelyn that all of the inconsistencies, all of the affairs, all of the sex tapes and secrets and lies would mean nothing without an ending. As long as Zoe was unaccounted for, there was no book. It was my opinion that with a mere missing person, without even a dead body, there was no story. I didn't want to see my friend waste years of her life researching a doomed, unresolvable narrative, so I said as much. Our exchanges grew terse, with Evelyn's becoming paranoid, cynical, at times even disturbing. So sadly, I didn't believe her when she told me she was getting close to something, and I didn't believe her when something started to get close to her. When Evelyn finally found her proof, when she finally confronted the person she believed to be responsible for Zoe's disappearance, when she told me what she was doing, I was preoccupied and I was slow to act. We will never know exactly what she discovered. On March 26th of 2019, Evelyn Mitchell was found behind the wheel of her car just outside of the Manchester city limits. Her skull had been caved in. Cynically, I had warned her that her story needed a dead body at the end if it was ever to be told. By the close of that day, There were 2 of them. My thanks to the Mitchell family who forwarded the notes, tapes, and documents that Evelyn had collected and who kindly trusted me with their editing and publication. What follows is a menacing roadmap leading directly to my friend's destruction, a destruction that neither she or I saw coming. But perhaps you can read these interviews differently. Perhaps you'll see the danger sooner than we did. Perhaps you're the person who could have done what I didn't and prevented another useless death. This book is dedicated to Evelyn Mitchell, it's dedicated to Zoe Nolan, and it's dedicated to everyone else who never came home. Joseph Knox, 2019. Thank you.
What a way to end. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for joining us tonight, Joseph. Okie doke, folks. Thank you for being with us for our 19th Virtual Noir at the Bar. Go on Twitter to vote for your favourite quote of the week. We've got quite a few nominations this week, so we might have to have a couple of rounds of that. My thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you to all of you who've been here before or who are new this evening. Massive thanks to all of our readers this evening who were just fantastic. So Bogdan Teodorescu, S.J. Watson, Joseph Knox, Helen Fields, Rebecca Fleet, S.E. Moorhead, Lo van Rensburg, Vanda Simon, Anita Frank and Alex Hawley. Massive thank you to my partner in crime, Simon. He might not be walking around shaking a hat in a bar. He's doing actually far more than that. Trust me, he is doing a lot that you don't see behind the scenes. Thank you to Ben Folds and Jason Isaacs for our fab music, as always. Yeah, I think that's everything. We've got 3 more after tonight. What we're going to do on a Wednesday night? Watch out. We've got a great lineup for you coming next week as well. So I will be here at 7:30 next Wednesday to open our virtual bar once again. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great week.